What's going on, everybody? Welcome to LakerCentral. I'm Alex. That is Vinay. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the pre or post game content. Also, make sure you guys subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, TuneIn, wherever you get your podcasts. And yes, Adrian, damn, we are early, man. This is an early edition of the pregame because the Lakers are playing pretty early today.
Yes.
7:30 Eastern, I believe, 4:30 Pacific. Also, guys, we're going to be meeting tomorrow with Johan Boha, I
Buha.
believe is I.
Boha. Yeah.
Yep, from the Athletic. He's the Athletics beat reporter for the Lakers. So
Yes.
we're going to meet with him tomorrow. And funny part is, right before he meets with us, he's actually interviewing Anthony Davis. So we are going to probably
Awesome.
have some interesting intel tomorrow, based on how this game goes. So make sure you guys check us out. Again, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything when we go live tomorrow with Johan. But man, Vinay, the Lakers lost the other night to Golden State, and timeline went crazy. But we've got a big game tonight against the Bucks, man. So how are you feeling after we dropped that game to the Warriors, and how are you feeling tonight?
I wasn't disappointed. I was a little annoyed. I think we could tell from like the first half of the game and just kind of
Mm-hmm.
how that third quarter was going that the Lakers were going to be annoying with just kind of how they were playing. I was hoping that LeBron and Anthony Davis would kind of get it together in the fourth quarter and kind of do that thing that we've seen them do with some of these other teams where they just kind of turn it up and just kind of finish the game off in a single quarter. But they chose not to. Obviously, we don't have to go over very, very specific plays, but there's a lot of stuff that was very uncharacteristic
Mm-hmm.
of what that kind of how the Lakers have been for the most part. And it's usually always been the same theme. In the fourth quarter, they just kind of get real lazy with the ball. They get lazy with their shot selection and just like sort of the crispiness of their offense. And then that's usually what ends up happening. I didn't really see too many issues defensively outside of like just, like I thought AD was like outright just like not trying to defend the rim and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But look, this was something that also happened last season too as well. So it was nice that we got a couple days off in between because I could like not have to think about it. Not think about it, but just kind of get some Lakers basketball out of my system. So then that
Mm-hmm.
way I could just kind of reset. So I was kind of glad that we didn't have any games for the next 2 days because we have 7 games coming up in the next 12 days, which is a lot of basketball
Yep.
to be watching in the next 12 days with this Milwaukee matchup. But I'm going to be very interested to see how they bounce back tonight. We know that Anthony Davis has said repeatedly the Lakers don't want to lose back-to-back games. I think he mentioned it again that he doesn't want to. This team doesn't want to lose back-to-back games. The Bucks were coming off of a loss on the same day
Yep.
as the Lakers were after against the Nets in a very close loss as well. And so it'll be really interesting to see how both these teams respond to that sort of that loss. How did you feel about like just kind of the way that game went? I know, and you follow more people than I do, or you definitely follow people that are a little bit more vocal in how upset they are. I try to keep my timeline as minimal as possible. But what was the collective Lakers timeline for you? And how did you feel?
People were like completely upset that the Lakers lost that game. Like no one
Yeah.
thought they should have lost. Everyone was upset. People were calling for wholesale changes. Caruso should get more minutes. West should be benched. I mean, we need a better rim protector. Like people just went nuts. And the crazy part was like I was disappointed in the loss, but I couldn't be as disappointed as I wanted to because people were going so overboard with their assessment of the game that it was just
Right.
like, okay, guys, like I think I tweeted out at some point like you guys would have survived the Shaq Kobe era because after championship
Yeah.
number one, they had a lot of stinkers in year two and year three of their championship
Yes.
run, and so clearly the Lakers when they jumped out on that big lead against the Warriors, and basically they jumped out and they said, "Oh, we can easily defeat this team," and then they just got really lazy.
Yeah.
LeBron, his rotations were terrible. He didn't play as well as he needed to in that second quarter. Golden State
Yeah.
clearly wanted to win that game, and I mean like they're gonna happen. So I like to me it's gonna be a long season. I wasn't prepared to get so worked up that I'm gonna call for wholesale changes. Not to mention
Sure.
they dropped a few games last year that they should have won. So it's just like the way I'm taking this season is I've been here before. And so, because I've been here before, I'm not going to get all upset. Like, you see videos, I mean, not so much from Lakers fans, but just across sports media of like people punching their TVs or like throwing stuff because they're so upset at losses. And I'm just like, look, man, they lost. So, I think what ended up happening was the Lakers lose that game, and then the Bucks lose to the Nets, right? And the Nets look
Yeah.
impressive, and people are like, "Oh my God, the Nets are gonna like crush the Lakers. Lakers can't even beat the
Right.
Warriors." And then, of course, a day later, the Nets end up losing to the Cavs in double
Yeah.
overtime, which was ridiculous. And so then things kind of like get back to normal. But for me personally, I just wasn't gonna get so upset that it was like I wasn't gonna panic. Like, what is there to panic over? We're champions. There are things the Lakers need to work on. Tonight will be a good, a barometer on where they're at. They're coming off
Mm-hmm.
a loss. The Bucks are coming off a loss. But even if they lose tonight, like it's such a, there's so much more season to go, and the season's
Yes.
been so weird with some teams being blown out. I don't know what you can take away from any of these games right now.
Yeah, I thought I think everything you said is pretty consistent. I feel as though there was a little bit extra animosity between Lakers Twitter and Warriors Twitter, probably
Yeah,
because of the respective leaders of both of those teams and their long-standing hatred or
yeah,
whatever you want to call it for themselves. So I think that sort of amplifies some of the stuff that's going on.
mm-hmm.
But I didn't see really anything that required really wholesale changes. I mean, just off the top of my head, when I want to go rewatch some of those defensive possessions from them, there were really simple things like the layup that Oubre had that I think gave them the lead or tied the game or something like that. Like Anthony Davis, like kind of just let him go to the rim. Like what Anthony Davis usually does, like games, he'll use his body and his verticality. And when you watch the replay, like he does, like he's quite easily collide and stuff like that and do it.
Yep.
He just didn't want to or whatever, and that's fine. And you have to remember that game, the Lakers were up 19 early, but the
Yes.
Warriors cut it to like 4 at one point. And then the Lakers, I think in the second half, they pushed it up to 16. And then towards the end of the third, the Warriors went on a little bit of a run to cut it to 11. So
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't like the Lakers like had a 19-point lead going into the fourth quarter. They definitely had a lead, but it just it reminded me, and I know we've used this example before, but it is pretty consistent. It's been every single time. You know, the first time our record got broken, that 57-0 record of us having a lead going
Mm-hmm.
into the fourth quarter and being undefeated, that broke against Portland. And that also broke against the Warriors. And surprisingly, both of those games, neither team, um, both of those games, neither times the Lakers look good on defense or look good on offense. And that's, when you see the similarities like that, it's, if we're able to see that and we're able to see that pattern, we know that Frank Vogel and the coaches do too. And
Mm-hmm.
I think they interviewed, when Kyle Kuzma was interviewed after the game, he said that, they definitely let one slip and they just kind of, it was a winnable game for them, but they were just, they let it slip away from them. And kudos to the Warriors, the young guys specifically, Eric Pascal, Oubre, who broke out of his funk,
Yep.
Wanamaker, Wiseman, and obviously Steph also too, and actually Draymond. Like those guys were like they had to score. Like the Lakers were doing their best to make sure Steph couldn't do what he wanted to do, but the other guys had to score. And when LeBron and Anthony Davis got really lazy, LeBron especially, the reason
Mm-hmm.
why Wiggins and Oubre and those guys were wide open was because LeBron wasn't rotating after his first rotation. And look, I don't hold that against LeBron. It's a 72 game season. Like I'm okay if he doesn't want to do that. We have a 7-game road trip coming up. I'm more concerned about making sure that he's in good spirit, like good health and
Right.
prepared for that because we know those road games are really, really good tests for this Lakers team of like just kind of where they are mentally. So I think you're right. But even though you and I've said that, hey, this regular season really doesn't matter. It's always going to be very difficult, and I think when there's tight games and we lose, it'll be crazy stuff on the timeline for sure. But yeah, I mean, we'll survive. The Lakers could be as low as like a 4 seed this season, and I won't be concerned at all. Because if we get to the Western Conference Finals, uh, I don't think it's going to be very easy to beat the Lakers 4 out of 7 games, especially not led by LeBron James, no matter where it is, Staples or wherever your arena is. So I don't think any of that stuff matters. The most important part is just building good, consistent habits. So I thought it was a good sign that they came out to a 19-point lead, even though that it blew over time. But I thought it was also nice that when it was like a 2-3 but single digit game, they were able to extend it out again to 16 points. It was Kuzma hitting like 3 threes in a row or something like that that pushed the game all the way out into like the plus 15 range again. But that's just, it's a game of runs, as Raj likes to say. And, that's the way I sort of treat it. This game will be a good game to watch tonight because the Bucks are a good team. I think from the games I watched where they played, I watched the Bucks Nets game earlier on the same day that the Lakers played. They're definitely going through a identity change as to how their offense works. And when I was watching them play the Nets, it was pretty clear the Nets knew what they were going to do. They were going to give the ball to KD, try to play as fast as possible, get up as many threes as they could, and that sort of stuff. But you could tell that the Bucks are still figuring out this new style of offense that's not just purely 5-out basketball, give it to Giannis and let him bulldoze his way to the rim. They're using him in pick and roll more. They have to figure out whether they want to use Brook Lopez at that center spot or move him or move Giannis to the 5. Like when I was watching the Nets game, I was just like, I don't know why Brook Lopez is on the floor. They should just move Giannis to center and then just play another guy who can kind of like a Bobby Portis guy, like who's a little bit more high motor because the Nets clearly did not care if Brook Lopez was going to take threes on them because they know it's not like it's going to hit them at like a 50% clip or something like that. So I think they're going through sort of an identity, not crisis, but like an identity change offensively. And they're still figuring things out. But it is the Lakers that are coming into town tonight. So they're going to look at us like, hey, if we beat these guys, we're a real team. And if we don't beat these guys, we still need to continue to work. So I'm going to be very curious. I think the biggest matchup tonight is not going to be Anthony Davis and Giannis, because I think that's what a lot of people are going to be looking at. I think the biggest matchup tonight may be Marc Gasol and Brook Lopez, because I want to see if they try to set Brook up for a lot of threes and try to get Gasol out of the paint. That'll be interesting to watch.
Well, I want to see how Schroeder comes out in this game too, because he came out in that game against the Warriors. He was roasting Steph. I think he had 25 in that game, but most of his points came in the first quarter. I mean, he was outstanding. He's been outstanding
Steph
against all
Steph and all the bigs that the Warriors had. Any bigs, yeah.
He was getting to the rim at will, and he's been really good against all the elite point guards in the NBA this season. But Drew is a really good defensive point guard, so I want to see how he does against Drew. But look, this is a game where I think the Lakers, they have all the personnel to beat the Bucks. Now I remember last year, the first time they played the Bucks, I think AD he just came back from injury. I believe that first time, I think, and they lost. But then they ended up winning the second game or whatever. But like, I am curious to see how they handle LeBron. Like, who does AD guard? Because I felt like down the stretch of that Nets game, I kept saying to myself, and I noticed people were saying it on Twitter, like, how come Giannis is Defensive Player of the Year and he's not guarding KD? Like, at what point do you not at least throw him out there? I mean, you can say it's not a part of the scheme. You can say coach doesn't want that, but like, you can't be the best, the best defensive player in the world and play a similar position and not guard the best offensive player on the other side of the ball. So I'm curious to see how much he guards LeBron or AD down the stretch if these games are close.
Yeah, I feel like he's much more. So I let me take a step back. So I think one thing folks need to understand is that when it comes to defense, the same way you can have when you compare it to like offense, and we talk about the guys that have like the bag of skills, like the different things that they can do offensively and stuff like that, compared to guys that don't have those skills but are still effective scorers, right? So like the KD versus LeBron thing, like LeBron doesn't do all that extra movement. It doesn't require all those extra dribbles because he knows what he's good at and he knows how to get to the rim without having to do all that extra stuff. Yep. And in the end, 2 points is 2 points, so it really doesn't matter. Defense kind of functions the same exact way. Like, I think Giannis is a good on-ball defender, but I don't know if he's a good on-ball defender against like really nimble guys like KD, right? So KD's an anomaly because he's like 6'10", and he kind of moves around like a shooting guard and stuff like that. And I think a guy like Anthony Davis, one of the reasons why I thought he was really good, he's really good. Like why he should have gotten Defensive Player of the Year last year over Giannis is because of those specific kinds of sequences. Like I trust Anthony Davis to defend KD out on the perimeter, but at the same time, I also trust him to do it without fouling. And
Right.
I don't know if I could say the same thing about Giannis, right? And I don't know if it's a defensive IQ thing, like his reaction timing and just kind of knowing what a player's tendencies are. That's just stuff you kind of naturally. That's what makes like the elite defenders versus
Mm-hmm.
the good high effort defenders. I don't know if Giannis has that. Now, to be fair, I don't watch the Bucks obviously as intimately as I do the Lakers, but I just have never seen it. Whenever I watch Giannis in isolation play, I've always seen that like either he makes a good defensive play, gets a block, or he fouls, right? Like I don't see sometimes him doing a lot of the 50-50 stuff
Mm-hmm.
where AD just kind of plays defense. Like we saw it with Paul George in some of those Clippers matchups where he guards Paul George. And what Paul loves to do is he loves to foul bait. He likes to run into players and try to draw the foul from the ref. And then as the defensive player is like angry at the ref, he tries to get a continuation play and stuff like that. You couldn't do that with Anthony Davis. And I think sometimes, I don't know if it's because of Giannis' reputation or he he tends to draw fouls on stuff like that. And so I mean I didn't participate in that conversation of why Giannis wasn't defending KD. I thought they should have tried it at least, but I think at the same time I don't know if the Bucks trust him to defend KD in a vacuum. Like just in a pure isolation. I think they like guys like Drew Holiday. I think they like guys like Chris Middleton because I don't know how to explain it. It's like because they spend so much time on the perimeter, they understand like the dance you have to do on the defensive end to defend a guy like KD, maybe more than Giannis would. And Anthony Davis, growing up, was a point guard,
Right.
all through high school, so he understands that sort of yin and yang of how you have to do this tango on the perimeter. And I mean, it's not an excuse for Giannis, but he's always going to keep hearing that, like telling people that, oh, this is part of our scheme. Like, I mean, well, if he's just shooting, if the guy's shooting jump shots over you, then what like clearly your scheme isn't working, right? So that's kind of the way that I see it. But I think in that example, I think he's better fit to guard guys like LeBron, guys like
Mm-hmm.
Anthony Davis. They're not guys who maneuver around the perimeter in a traditional fashion, like a shooting guard would, like a Chris Middleton or a guy like what's it called, or a guy like who am I thinking of? KKD.
Oh,
Yeah, like Drew and KD. So I think LeBron is going to get defended by guys like Chris Middleton and Drew Holiday, and I think Giannis is going to be exclusively on AD, and ideally trying to funnel him into certain guys and stuff like that, and that sort of thing. But I'll be curious to see. AD didn't take too many threes last game, and I know that Frank Vogel's wanted him to take more
yep.
threes so he could spread the floor. So I'm going to be very curious to see how this sort of kind of works out for the Lakers and kind of what strategy they come out with early in the game.
I mean, last year when the Bucks beat us, I think Giannis had a ridiculous like 5 for 8 3-point game. Like he had like his
Yeah.
best 3-point game of his career. And we said back then if he's got to shoot like that to beat the Lakers, then they're not going to beat the Lakers. And so I don't know if he has one of those kinds of games. I think he'll come out and play a good game because I don't know if he's going to play a bad game after just losing to the Nets and lay a stinker against the Lakers. I think he'll have a good game. I think the Lakers are going to have to be focused. Sonic wants to know, who do we think would be an X factor today?
I think our X factor today is going to be KCP. It's going to be one of our guards, our non-superstar guard kind of guys. We know Giannis is Giannis for the guys in the chat telling me not to pronounce the G. I see your comments, so I'll call him Giannis. He's not Italian. You're right. I think Giannis and AD will match up. LeBron with whatever amount of guards that they want to match him up with it is what it is. But I think the X factor for the Lakers today is probably going to be somebody like KCP or Kuzma, Caruso, maybe even THT. The Bucks have guards. They have wing guys.
Yep.
In DiVincenzo, they have wing guys. I don't know if Connaughton is still with them. He may still be. Connaughton, Bryn Forbes. They have guys that are high effort rebounders when they play that spaced out offense. And then they have like Bobby Portis also too as well. Those guys, because they're high effort, like they'll put pressure on the offensive glass. They're very good defensive rebounders. Mike Budenholzer gives them the green light to, like, if you get the rebound and it's a clear lane in front of you, like push the ball up the floor and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff like that happens. And the guys that'll be the X factors for the Lakers are the guys who may go to like close out on a three and then be able to leak out on the back end, similar to like what KCP was doing to like Houston and stuff like that. So if the Bucks go, if for whatever reason, if the Bucks go very three happy and they start missing shots, guys like KCP and Kuzma and Caruso, they're going to be the benefactors of the long outlet passes and stuff like that. And so that's the part. That's the part like where I'm looking to see. I think the Lakers have to win that battle in order to win this game tonight, because the game that we lost, we were getting overwhelmed to some degree by like not the size per se, but the effort of their wings crashing the boards and stuff like that, and playing defense, being like extra defenders and trying to swarm the paint when LeBron and Anthony Davis drive. I know a lot of people have said they're hoping Wes Matthews bounces back because I don't think he left on bad terms. But they're saying like it's like a revenge game for him. It'd be nice to see him get kind of motivated and uncorked too as well. I think of all the Lakers on our roster, he's the only one with a negative plus minus on this team of everybody who's collected serious minutes. So it'd be nice to see him get loose. It'll be the other guys. I don't think it'll be the main guys. So I'll be interested to see. You got an X factor in mind?
So I think KCP is one of them, and I'm gonna go for a guy that gets a lot of hate on the timeline, man. But Kuz, I'd like to see Kuz have like a. I don't need him to go for 30 or nothing, but I'd just like to see him have like a solid defensive performance and just shoot the ball well, not do too much. Tonight's gonna be a high profile game. It's national television. I don't want him to step outside of himself. I want him to get clean shots. One dribble or less. Not if someone like DiVincenzo or someone on their team that's not as much as a well-known player kind of is getting hot. I don't want Kuz to think he needs to do the same thing. Like I'd like to see him have a solid game tonight and just play within himself, because I know LeBron and Anthony Davis they're going to bring it tonight. I think KCP will bring it because he's been Mr. Consistent now, basically all through the playoffs and all this season. To your point, I would like to see Wes have a really nice game. He had one game this season where I think he shot like 6 for 6 from 3-point land or something ridiculous like that. I'd love to see him have kind of a revenge game, but Kuz would probably be my X factor. Let me ask you this question.
I was going to say,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I wonder, this is going to be another game where we're going to get to see the difference that Schroeder makes running with those starters and stuff like that. I remember distinctly, that last season they had Eric Bledsoe, who was I think he made it to the all defensive team last season for them. He's no longer on that team. And they don't have George Hill anymore, who's not like a super stout defender, but he's a good guard defender. And when the Lakers would play Rondo, it was difficult because the Bucks would basically punt defending Rondo at all. And they would just basically say, okay, if he wants to take threes, he can take as many threes as he wants. And it really doesn't matter to us. And so I want to see, with the same thing that we've talked about last season, like if the Bucks are also a year behind the Lakers in thinking that this roster is purely generating their offense just straight out of whatever Anthony Davis and LeBron James do, it should bode well for everybody else, like especially a guy like Schroeder, because they may sleep on him. They may not pay attention to what he does. And we saw what kind of damage he can do to the bigs on your team if they're flat-footed. So if the Lakers are able to hunt out Brook Lopez on switches or something like that, Schroeder should be able to benefit off of all that sort of action.
And the Bucks right now are second in the East. I think they're 9-5. And last year, no one thought that the Bucks weren't the best team in the East. Maybe the entire NBA, but certainly the East. There seemed to be a gap. But records can be a bit misleading, especially this year. But now you've got the Nets who have their big three. You've got the 76ers, and Embiid looks great. But Emmanuel wants to know, are the Bucks better this year or are they worse so far?
So I wouldn't say they're better or worse. I would say they're different. I think they're just as good as they were potential-wise last year. The team that can make it to the finals, and then depending on who they play against in the finals, they have a good solid chance of winning. I think this season they have added guys who add variance to their offense. And by that I mean their offense, and this is something that I think I am one of the only folks. I don't see it ever mentioned on Twitter, but I know me and you discuss this a lot. That like when you run a data-driven offense that looks for very specific types of shots and
Mm-hmm.
puts value on specific types of shots, it's very easy to predict where the ball is going to. It becomes easier to predict where the ball is going to go and how we have to play defense against you. And the Bucks ran an offense like that last season, where they ran a very predictable offense, which obviously emphasized driving kicks for threes. They ran into a team like Miami that was ready for it because they knew
Yep.
what it was, and their bailout process were isolations for Chris Middleton or isolations for Giannis. And when Miami had a guy like Bam Adebayo who could basically play Giannis one-on-one and at least make him like a 50-50 player, whether it was in the post or in straight up, it hurt their offense significantly because they had nothing. They couldn't. The foundation of their offense was Giannis getting to the rim, and when he couldn't do that effectively, it really, really staggered. It hurt everything else.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you saw the game where the Bucks took one game off of Miami when Giannis was hurt, was because the Bucks had to change how they played. They had to move the ball around. They had to run mid-range shots and all that kind of stuff. So I think that this season they're just as good as they were last season. The difference is that they've now got guys that do more variance. So when I watched that Nets game, they were running down screens for Bryn Forbes. They were running a ton of screens, down screens and pick and roll action for Chris Middleton. When KD was on fire for the Nets, Chris Middleton was getting wide open jumpers. I think Charles Barkley mentioned it on Inside the NBA. Inside the NBA afterwards. He's like, I don't know why the Bucks stopped doing this. Why did they go to a Giannis post up when Chris Middleton was getting wide open, mid-range shots? He missed a couple, but he made a lot. And I think Giannis, sorry, yeah. And so I think they're very good. And I think the thing that the Lakers team has to be prepared for is when they go to an offense that doesn't involve Giannis like that. When they go to an offense that's more traditional, the way that we try to run our offense, running
Right.
down screens for KCP, horns actions, all that and all that sort of stuff. So that's the way I see it. I think they have more natural variance on their team, and then they also have a somewhat level of unpredictability that they didn't have last season. And I think what's happening this season is because they're trying to figure out how to balance all that sort of stuff in the games. They've lost a couple more games than they normally would if they just did spam those Giannis drives to the rim the entire game. Giannis drives to the rim. I gotta get used to it, guys. I don't say Schroeder either. I say Schroeder. So you guys gonna have to bear with me with my pronunciations.
But it isn't part of the Bucks' problem that Bud isn't good making adjustments. That he kind of like he just stick. It was the same issue he had in Atlanta. So all the criticism that Doc got with the Clippers, Bud gets with Milwaukee. That like he goes into the game, he's got his game plan, and he's terrible at adjusting. You look at Vogel on the other hand. Vogel, in the playoffs and certainly in the finals, his adjustments were really, really solid and helped lead to a championship.
Yeah, it's I think they're in the same position that the Lakers are without a championship, the same position the Clippers are without a championship, where regular season needs to be sort of a petri dish, like an experiment situation where they continue to try and figure out how they work. It's the same thing for like the Nets, like you really need to spend these 72 games in the regular season getting everything right, getting your rotations right, getting on the defensive end, figuring out what your offense is going to be in different situations against different schemes and stuff like that. The Lakers are the only team that has the luxury of not being stressed about getting it done sooner than later because we have a championship in tow. Obviously, there's still, I've actually heard from multiple different outlets in different games, non-Laker games. I've heard people specifically say, I think I heard it in an Atlanta game, I heard it in a Chicago game, where different folks that were beat writers for teams were specifically saying that teams this season have not had any opportunity to practice, like do live practice sessions. They're all just doing everything through film. So it's very hard for them. They're practicing in the middle of these games. And so teams know that they're going to lose some of these games if it doesn't work out. If that rotation scheme or whatever doesn't work out correctly and stuff like that the way it does. So I think one of the things that we have to remember is even though Lakers Twitter does get very upset when the Lakers do lose games, there is no practice. So I'm the reason why I thought it was really good that we had this break. Um, is because I wonder if the Lakers actually got a chance to do some real film session and maybe some like on court stuff, like maybe not like an actual 5-on-5 and stuff like that, but like walk through some of the defensive schemes and stuff that they want. And like recently, what we've seen is like the Wizards have had 6 games get canceled or postponed. I today we just found out. I think it's the Grizzlies. Who is it? Yeah, the Grizzlies' next 3 games are going to be postponed. So I wonder if the teams that benefit from not having to play like the Wizards and the Grizzlies will get to use like those extra days to actually get practice sessions in and be
Right.
better in the long run and stuff like that. So we just have to wait and see what these teams look like. I don't even know if they'll what this regular season really means. This has been one of the most bizarre regular seasons like you'll ever see in terms of like the competitive landscape of guys playing great one day and playing terribly the next, and the overall level of engagement from stars on a regular basis.
Yeah, that I mean, Kenny in the comments he mentioned that he thought the Lakers' poor performance against the Warriors was did a disservice to the game, to the spirit of the game, and I think that
Yeah,
look they gave up. They clearly weren't interested in that game, but I just think that there's so much going on and they can't practice as Vinay said. It's different, and so in terms of trying to figure out if the team is real or not, I would simply say that they've got LeBron James and Anthony Davis. The team is clearly legit. They are a better team than they were last year. I just think that it's going to take time to figure out how they're implementing these new guys, what plays they want to run, conditioning. All those things are still happening right now. Not to mention, you know, they're all trying to make sure they don't get sick because, as Kuz mentioned a week or so ago, nobody wants to blow it
yeah,
for the Lakers right now. And so,
yeah.
I would cut them a little slack until we get further into the season to see what we're working with. But I do want to point out that Adrian, he said that we perform better when you don't have your glasses on. So, I mean, wow.
I've only now worn them once, and we're 1-0. So, if well, look, if we lose this game, then we can blame Adrian for it because he told me to take them off. So, because
But
not enough sample size, as the data nerds would say, to give theory to that. But I'll take them off for now.
um, Michelle, she's asking a really good question. Like these games that they're canceling, like how are we going to make them up? Because it's
So
they're postponing a lot of games right now.
yeah, so one of the interesting things is that I read from Woj's article on ESPN is that now they're talking about not just postponing games, they're going to outright cancel, not cancel, but they'll outright like postpone entire blocks of games for teams as soon as something like this happens. Because I think the situation with like the Wizards and the fact
Yeah,
that they've had 6 games in a row be postponed, I think the league is looking at it saying, look, we just need to postpone a block of them until these guys don't go anywhere. And we've talked about this before. I feel like a situation like the Wizards, if it's the same guy that keeps testing over and over again, like the league is going to have to step in and they're going to have to
yep.
say something.
Hmm.
They're going to have to like. I'm not saying that they have to publicly name who it is, but they're going to have to like basically suspend guys and just say, look, you're just not following the rules. Like you don't care. You know what I mean? Like you don't care to follow protocol. Like, and I'm hoping that it doesn't get to that case. But you got 6 games for the Wizards that are going to be postponed. Uh, Memphis is going to have their next 3 games postponed. Like that's a problem, And I don't know how you like. They're not going to cancel those games. Nobody's forfeiting those games. They're going to have to backload those games in the second half of the schedule. And if I'm a Grizzlies fan or something like that, and all of a sudden I got to play like 2 back-to-backs a week or something like
Hmm.
that just to make up these games, I'd be pretty pissed. But at the same time, this is just the way it's going to be. And so I just don't know. It's such a difficult situation to handle. Like I think it's a good thing that they're instead of just postponing one game at a time, they're doing blocks of games at a time because it's like 5 days worth of game, 5 days of break or whatever it is. But I think at some point they're gonna have to start suspending some of these guys, or they got to
I
come up with
agree.
something, man. They're gonna have to say, look, you can't come back to play, and if you can't test positive, right? Like if you let's say you tested positive, we said, hey, look, in 7 days you can come back. If you don't test positive in 7 days, we got to start fining you or something. Like, because like at this point, it's not like we're going to turn on a surveillance system, right? We're not going to use like government resources to track your
Mm-hmm.
whereabouts and stuff like that to see whether you're following. But clearly, you guys are not, like, whoever it is doesn't care. Like we've talked about Michael Porter Jr. before. Like
Yep.
clearly he doesn't care. So it's just like, all right, when we saw the Kyrie situation and when we saw the Harden situation, they only got fined 50K. But what hurt them was that they lost those game checks.
Yep.
Yeah, and when those game checks start going away, even for guys who are not max tier, I mean, Kyrie's a max tier player and he's not
Right.
forfeiting any checks. So it's just a responsibility thing, man. And the NBA, I think, is going to eventually have, if it goes in that direction, they may have to find a way to kind of soften and spin that to make it more about, the safety of the league and the people who are participating as employees in the league, as opposed to like, hey, we're dropping the hammer on all these sort of guys. But I think it's going to get to that direction. Like, how else do you tackle this if it's the same guy over and over again?
No, I'm all for suspending guys that aren't following the health and safety protocols, because
Mm-hmm.
at some point, so you're going to have a couple different things happening, and you mentioned it and alluded to these things. Like, look, if they're postponing games and they've got to make those games up because of the TV agreement, then then players are going to get upset that they got to play all these back to backs at the end of the season. Like, the season is already truncated, right? So then at the end of the season,
Yeah.
let's say you've got like a team on the, maybe they're an 8th seed like the Grizzlies, and now they've got to play all these games, 6 or 7 games in like 2 weeks or in a week and a
Mm-hmm.
half or something. They're going to be pissed off. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe a player gets injured or something because there's all these additional games they got to make up. The league is going to have to at some point block off games. They're going to have to at some point start suspending guys, and not just the max $50,000 fine, but like, you got to miss a game check, like a max tier guy. And I don't think you'll see this much really with the max tier guys. I mean, Kyrie obviously, but the max tier guys, I think you won't. I think it'll be some of the other guys that you might see this issue with. But again, they're going to have to forfeit game checks, because at some point, how do you make up all of these games? And where do you go from here? Let's assume that in 3 months, the vaccine hasn't been distributed, and I don't think it's going to have been distributed, and things aren't going to be that
Mm-hmm.
much better. Where do you go from here if you've still got to play all these games? I do think they need to go to a bubble situation where it's maybe four
Right.
bubbles across the country or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
clearly everybody's not taking this seriously. And even if it's, even if 90% of the league is taking it seriously, it only takes a handful of guys to disregard the rules, and all of a sudden this shit spreads, and then what?
Yeah.
I mean, like,
Yeah.
that's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, and there was some positive news today. I think in the White House address today, like Dr. Fauci was saying that if we can get 75 to 80% of Americans like vaccinated and stuff like that, we life can, by the summertime at least or whatever, like we can reach some normalcy at some point. I'm sure the NBA probably wants to try and get their guys vaccinated if they're willing to be vaccinated sooner than later, because that would go into summertime and stuff like that. But there's shortages of vials or surpluses of vials.
Right.
I don't know how that's working out, but you're right. And I mean, let's just playing devil's advocate. If I have to look at this from an owner's perspective, like one guy is sabotaging 6 other players, which gets me,
Right.
or 7 other players, which gets me below the 8 minimum that I need to play these games. And I'm going to have to pay these guys no matter what, because the NBA is just postponing these games. So not only is my fan base, and like, for those owners, they may just be like, why do I have to deal with all these mistakes that these players in the union are making? I thought we had an agreement that these guys would be responsible. So
Yep.
I understand that part from a business aspect, especially when it's like, if they have like advertising, like, I don't know if you watched the Warriors game yesterday, but anybody who watched the Warriors game yesterday, they have an insane amount of ads on their floor. If you guys see it, they've got like maybe 6 different companies being advertised at a single time. And that's probably also why they're so very valuable now in Forbes. But like, imagine not being able to get that national TV time. So if you had a
Right.
national TV televised game, now all of a sudden, whatever ad impressions that you were promising to people or whatever it was, that's out the window, because you may get rescheduled to like a Saturday game where nobody's watching or something like that, right? So now you don't hit your quotas and stuff like that, and television contracts can go awry and whatnot. So as an owner, I would imagine that it's probably irritating and stuff like that. On the other hand, if I'm a fan of the game, I would want these guys to be healthy when they play games. But at some point, if I find out if it's just one guy at the end of the bench or a guy who's like the ninth or 10th guy in our rotation is the one sabotaging everybody, not sabotaging, but, like being irresponsible and sabotaging the rest of the team, I'd be pretty pissed. Like
Mm-hmm.
if we take our Lakers example, if it was like Wes Matthews or if it was like Taylor Horton Tucker, I don't care about like what his future promise is. It's like, bro, we can't even play our games. You're making it
Right.
more difficult for your teammates to be successful in the long run, and this team successful in the long run. I respect why I understand whatever somebody may feel about it, but that's how I would feel. I would be like, as a fan, I'm like, you're sabotaging your team. Like, if you don't want to follow the rules, then just don't show up. You know what I mean? Like there has to be some medium there. And so obviously I don't know if these guys, if the guys that are testing positive, if it's just, accidental or something like that, or if it's they just don't care. But if you can, like in Kyrie and Harden's situation, if it becomes, even if you don't necessarily have like video proof of them
Right.
doing it, if the guy keeps repeatedly testing positive and it's pretty much stopping entire team from being able to play games, you've got to like eventually say, look, just don't. You either get it together or you're losing game checks. And I think that's the direction that the NBA is going to have to go in if this continues to go the way it does, because they've now tried to acquiesce for these postponing one game at a time. Like in the Grizzlies case now, they're postponing batches of games. So this stuff is going to start adding up at some point, if it happens with other teams as well. But I think for the most part, the single postponement of games hasn't been too bad, like the one-offs and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But if it starts turning into these big batches of games, that second half of the schedule is going to be brutal for some of these teams.
No, it is, and I feel like to some degree, all that goodwill that the NBA and Adam Silver built up, last season, it's starting to slowly go out the window because people are asking, like, well, what are the players doing? Like,
Yeah,
last season, the players voiced, they had concerns about health and safety, and that's one of the reasons you went to the bubble, and now there is no bubble, but the players aren't themselves, governing themselves accordingly. And Kenny
yeah.
posted this in the comments. Let me see if I can pull it up really quick. It was about George Hill's comment about let me see if I can find it really
I remember he's a grown man and he's going to do what he wants or whatever and stuff like
yeah.
that.
I mean, I said this to a few buddies of mine that asked me about that. Like, one, I was always taught if you're a grown man, you don't need to tell everybody. That number one.
Right.
And number two, if you're a grown man, you behave like one. And so
Right.
this just is not about like your personal belief that you want to go out and see whoever you want to see. You have to be conscious of it not only impacts you and your individual family, but everybody you work with, because it's not like you could work like
Right.
Vinay and I work, remotely for a year. You're still going into a facility and being around everybody, not just players, but coaches and other people that work there. And you're traveling from city to city. Like, there's more to this than just I'm going to do what I want to do. And I think when you have a player come out and say that, I do think the league has to place a phone call to that player and say, wait a minute, like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I don't know if Adam Silver will be the person who does it directly. I think he'll probably go to Michelle Roberts
Mm-hmm.
of the NBA PA. She'll go to the vice presidents, and he'll probably try to do it quietly. That's one thing
Right.
I have noticed that the NFL does very well. They do everything behind closed doors because they don't want people speculating. And we know that certain political groups
Sure.
are big fans of the NBA in general, and they're not fans of the NBA. So the media scrutiny on the NBA is always going to be significantly more higher because they've allowed the NBA's engaged in politically charged topics and socially charged topics. So I think he's going to try and handle it quietly so that people don't get, or players aren't offended or outed and stuff like that as
Right.
people being irresponsible. Now, I'm sure he doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want the players to look irresponsible. But I will say that like I feel like it's going to come to that because of the comments by George Hill.
Yep.
Like he said it outwardly, and I think he was pretty outwardly spoken when they were in the bubble, and he was saying
Yes.
that when they was playing for Milwaukee, he specifically said we shouldn't even be here. I don't know why we're here. I don't know why he didn't opt out of playing in the bubble if he felt that strongly and stuff like that. Maybe it was just because of the events that happened while they were in the bubble. that they were a little bit more, it changed his feelings about everything. But
Yep.
it's just we can't have it both ways. That's the part that I'm trying to like explain. Like if I have to look at it like a regular job, like if my job tells me I have to come into work and I say, look, I don't feel comfortable coming into the office because of COVID protocol, and they say, okay, let's let us make this work, and then let you know, and you let us know if this works. If they make it to a point where I'm okay with it, I can't go to work and then just start complaining about it when I'm at work.
Right.
And that's the part that's really difficult. I can't co-sign that sort of behavior where it's like, oh, I want to get paid, but at the same time, I want to complain about everything that I'm doing while I'm continuing to collect these checks. So as long as these players kind of keep their stuff under wraps, like they're not out in public at
Right.
parties and stuff like that, partying and stuff like that, I think they'll be fine. So long as they don't test positive and they take the precautions that they need to. But I think what's making the league's issue, what's making it more difficult for Adam Silver to do his job, and I know there's people on social media that are like attacking him, say, "Oh, he's not like David Stern. David Stern would put the hammer down." Like the reason Adam Silver is trying to give these players a chance to do it, like I'm trying to meet you more than
Right.
halfway, and you guys are making this really difficult when you guys are going out and partying and stuff like that. Especially if you're, the two bigger stars in the league in
Mm-hmm.
Kyrie and Harden situation. So I think he's going to try to do it quietly if he can. But George Hill's comments certainly don't help. Like it certainly doesn't help when young guys like Michael Porter Jr. go on Instagram and just start saying that, like, the COVID's not real and all that sort of, like it's just not, forget anything else. It's just not a good look for the league that you play in. And that's just an aspect of being an athlete. It's not fair. It's the same way that we talk about celebrities not being public property, but
Yep.
whenever a celebrity does something, it gets reported and everybody has to pass on their opinions on social media. It's just the nature of the way the world works and the way society works. So we'll see, man. If it's always the same guy, and I'm sure Silver knows. Like I'm sure, like the
Yeah.
teams and the owners and the NBPA, they know who's testing positive over and over again, and I'm sure they're going to have some very direct conversations with some of
Mm-hmm.
those players and just say, look, we can't keep doing this. I don't know how they're going to work their way out of it, but there's going to have to be some tough conversations had at some point.
There's gonna have to be. There's no way around it. I think it's way too serious. There's been over 419,000 deaths. Uh, you know, it was just in the Wall Street Journal today that Joe Biden did not inherit an actual COVID plan, which might be a good thing given the
Yeah.
dude that was just there. But having to start from scratch when we're already damn near a year in, hey, that doesn't mean that we're going to get this thing fixed within a month or two. And so you do need, unfortunately, that puts more pressure on high profile people like entertainers and athletes for them to kind of do the right thing because they're the most publicized folks. And so you can't have
Right.
NBA players saying that I'm going to do whatever I want and this isn't real. You just can't. So, but I guess we'll close out on that, man. Vinay, do we get a win tonight? That's the question.
I think we get a win tonight. I'm not a betting man, so I'll always give this disclaimer. But I think all the betting stuff was saying that it's basically a pick 'em between these two teams. And I think the reason why it's a pick 'em, or the fact that it's a pick 'em, is a good sign for the Lakers because a team like Milwaukee relies on their fans. A team like Milwaukee relies on like that home
Yep.
court kind of advantage, and the Lakers don't. The Lakers will go win anywhere that they want to. And they just lost a big game in, I would say, an embarrassing fashion to a team that they
Yep.
should not
Yep.
have lost to. So I think they're going to be very serious about sending a message. And I think that's something that they like to do. They like to send a message. Again, it's another national televised game. And more importantly, they just watched the Nets lose to everybody was watching that Nets Cleveland game. It felt like yesterday,
Yeah.
so they watched them lose yesterday. And I don't think they want a situation like that where they and obviously the Bucks are much better than the Cavs, but
Sure.
like they don't want to underestimate their opponent. I think they'll be a little bit more serious, and I think the extra days off may help them because this road trip coming up is not going to be very friendly to their bodies at all. So hopefully they come out strong, they come out tough, and we get a Laker win, and we can go 2-0 without me wearing these glasses on the pregame.
I think we get a win tonight. The Clippers have won 5 in a row, so now we're tied with them for first in the West. So I think we get a win tonight. And guys, we're not going to do a post game tonight because if you didn't hear at the beginning of the show, we've got Jovan Buha from The Athletic, Lakers beat report. He's going to be with us tomorrow morning if you're on the West, but middle of the day if you're here on the East. He's actually interviewing Anthony Davis before he comes on the show tomorrow. So he's going to be able to provide us, I think, some nuggets of information based on what happens tonight against the Bucks and just kind of what the mindset is for this Lakers team right now. So that should be fun. Make sure you guys subscribe to the channel. I turn on notifications so you know when we go live tomorrow with Jovan. And subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Google, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. We're going to sign off, man. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, as always, to Laker Central. And enjoy the game tonight, guys.